I was going to jot down some notes, on the story, and I couldn't because it's been such a journey. How can you put like a coherent story to it? There are so many kind of pathways that led to Salt. It wasn't like it was one linear path. It was many, many things that came together that led to me being part of the constellation and led to me adopting Salt as I guess, a key part of who I am, a part of my own DNA. So I think Salt was always part of my DNA from the beginning anyway, before I discovered these letters. And I was pursuing a path in the NGO sector, traditional, I'm going to move on and become part of the UN, high-powered, influential jobs, and blah, 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 and had these dreams. And I always felt like a phony, like a fraud, like what I was pursuing that didn't fit with what I truly believe about people and about who I am. So I managed to, get those jobs and, be in some really interesting roles with wonderful people and do interesting work. But there was just something, there's just this feeling of, this is not really how I like to interact with people. And let's be frank, most of the time I was interacting with a computer screen anyway. So at one point I was lucky enough to be placed in UNFPA in Jakarta in Indonesia on a program run by the Australian government for young people. And I was lucky enough to get a role through that program. And so here I was on my way to my big NGO career thinking, this is not, I don't feel authentic here. And it was lucky that at that very time, I was asked to go and accompany some small community-based organizations on a facilitation weekend. I didn't know what I was doing, who they were, I just went. And there were these amazing people. One was called Lulu, Dewi, Chandra, all these incredible people who, for those that know of Indo competence, they know I'm talking about now our Indonesian team. This was 2010. So they were talking about this thing called SALT and how they were using CLCP and SALT, or they called it ACP, AIDS Competence Process, for their own communities to respond to the issue of HIV/AIDS. And everything they were saying completely resonated with my deep fundamental belief about how we respond to challenges and who we are and how we should interact with one another. So it wasn't like I discovered something new. It was like I'd come home. I'd found my people. I'd found my family. Finally, it was that like, yes, here you are. Here we are. I found you. Now what do I do? So I spent nearly a year just hanging around them, learning from them, observing, listening, learning the facilitation process. And at the same time, I got to meet Jean-Louis, I got to meet Gaston. I became part of the constellation through Ning. And also we started to try to encourage the UNFPA staff in Jakarta, in the head office in Jakarta, to also apply SALT as we thought about our strategic plan for the coming 3 years. So I was with Gaston leading us, I was part of that process, and I got to take a bit of a kind of influencer role in that process. So I learned a lot. I was lucky enough to go with Jean-Louis to Jayapura, which is Papua, the Papua part of Indonesia, and having that experience in a different community just opened my eyes. So at the end of that year, I joined the global support team, and I waited a little longer than a year, actually. I moved to London, I got married, and then I was doing some consultancy work and other things, and then eventually moved into the global support team in the role of transfer, and did my very best to try and apply what I knew about forming partnerships and forming relationships to transfer the approach to new communities. But admittedly, I never felt in flow. It was really hard for me, and it was really challenging role, working remotely and just being part of this huge global organization, you know, and trying to connect and expand what we were doing. But I was lucky enough to continue to go and meet more communities and hone my facilitation skills and take some coaching opportunities. And over the years, I've just got to work with some of the most incredible coaches, and I've learned a lot from them. I've worked with Sirenat, I've worked with Duset in Cambodia, Onesmus in Zambia, and now in Kenya. And of course, all the global support team members, and many more. So I've really learned a lot from our fellow Constellation friends. And yeah, and then here I am. I had my kids, and I to business. I really love building my business. I have two businesses I've been working on in the last few years, and it doesn't mean that SALT stops. It's not about applying SALT in a workplace or in a project or by being a coach or by being a facilitator or by being in the global support team. SALT being part of the DNA. And whether you're an employer or a friend or a wife or a mother or a facilitator or a coach, you apply it. I apply it. Yeah. The launch we had at the Rubin Center, like I said, it was an event that the Wangu Kanja Foundation were having anyway, and they allowed us to basically use it as the launch. And you had a classroom seating set up, like a classroom, yeah, with maybe 60 people in there, maybe more. Very hot, crowded room in the Rubin Center. And Jean-Louis walks in, and in his usual fashion, well, we better make this a circle. So we make it a big circle. And he started standing in the middle of the circle, telling the story of is it Kasure, the first story in the book, the bank robber who held coffee nights after he had realized he had strengths and became a real asset to his community. And he told this story, and he really had this group hanging off every word. And we didn't have a lot of time. We only had half a day, including SALT visits in the local community. But in that very short amount of time, he managed to really and I guess plant that seed through just a few interactive exercises and some big strategic questions that were asked to stimulate people to think differently about their strengths. Because of course, this group are probably often thinking about the fact that they have so many needs. Most of them were community health workers. They visit surrounding community members who have a lot of challenges. So they see a lot of problems. And this was really about saying, let's look at the strengths we have in the room. And we actually did like an audit of the strengths in the room through a very quick exercise where people told a story of change, and we looked at the strengths applied to create that change just from one story per person. We had a whole list of strengths in the room, and that was a big spark that lit up in that group. And from there, we were able to go out on SALT visits, and really, they really had it. They really had the idea. So that launch, you know, only half a day with completely people who had no idea who we were, what we were doing. From the beginning to the end, something had shifted, really shifted. And now we see the potential that's coming from that. So there's really a lot of value, I think, in these launches and in using, if you have an invitation with a group of people who don't know SALT, it's a great opportunity to share it.